Ryan.
What are we talking about today on Prickly Pear Primas?
We are talking about Selena the series on Netflix. So first, before we get into talking about Selena the series, since this is our inaugural podcast, I think it'd be great if we each gave a little bit of background about who we are, so our audience kind of knows, because you and I already know who we are. For the audience watching who may not know this, as hopefully many people won't know this who are new to watching, I am Savanah and this is Rian. We are cousins. I am a year older, or technically, I think 11 months older than Rian. And we are both from Arizona. We grew up in the Southwest. Me personally, I would describe myself as being an artist. I recently graduated with my master's in arts politics from NYU, and a lot of my personal practice and different endeavors is really looking at and analyzing the different intersections between pop culture, art, different forms of media, and how it relates to politics and different social justice issues. I have some other different parts of my background that maybe I'll bring up later if they are more interesting. I am a Cancer and a vegan.
Hi, I'm Rian, and education is important. However, my education, I feel like, was a little bit of a sham. I went to Syracuse University, shout out, and I learned nothing. I feel like I've learned more in my ears from shows on TV like Selena or the movie, and video games and magazines, manga, books. Those have really been my teachers, and it's always been important to me ever since high school to analyze them and get the most out of them that I possibly can, to think about how they affect me and affect the world that I live in. So I'm just, as always, happy to be here, and I think it's just exciting.
So today we are going to be talking about the Selena series that aired on Netflix just a couple months ago. It came out on December 4th, 2020. This series was starring Christian Serratos as Selena Quintanilla, and this series was produced by some members of Selena's family, including her father Abraham and her sister Suzette. And this series is not the first telling of Selena's story. There was the movie that came out in 1997 starring J-Lo. There's been other subsequent retellings of her story that have not been really authorized by the family. And so this is the first time that her family has really been directly involved in telling her story. And I would like to hear from you now. What thoughts have you had about Selena?
All right. Thanks, Professor Pinnell. I really appreciate that. So, like you mentioned, it was a movie before with J-Lo, and that's kind of like the one that is really stuck in my memory. Like when I think of Selena, I struggle to picture the real Selena. I see J-Lo, right? Just from growing up. So I wanted to think about why this is timely and why they decided that this is a good time to release the Netflix series, why the family decided it was timely, like what makes it culturally relevant to release it right now, as opposed to, I don't know, even 10 years after the J-Lo movie. So that's what I kind of found interesting, is like watching it, I just found myself thinking, is this necessary? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that while I was watching it, I kind of was having similar thoughts. My initial gut reaction about why they do this now is just because there has been probably in the past 5 years more of like a bigger discussion about the Latinx community, trying to have representation in the political, and even just not even just in media such as musicians or movies, also just generally across the board society, like during the election, like that was one of the biggest things that was talked about, was the next vote and what that is and who is a part of that. And so I think that that's what led to it. I think that there's also been a shift in culture of like young Latinx people, especially with young Latinas, I think, trying to like embrace those things, maybe embracing the things that they were told not to embrace. Like if you were growing up in the 90s and you really liked Selena, but it seemed like not okay maybe to embrace that part of your culture, but the other, like the rest of society that you're around. Those are kind of my initial thoughts as to why they would decide to do it now. I was kind of disappointed in the way that they didn't try to do more to touch on relevant issues today. Like to me, I would think if they were going to be retelling the story now, like there should have been more of a clear purpose as to why, versus almost feeling like maybe it was just capitalizing on those other things that I mentioned, and it being like being lucrative to talk about Selena right now versus being how can we use her story to talk about larger issues.
Yeah, and I think maybe the problem also came from the marketing. I don't think it was intentionally kind of a vapid statement, right? Like I don't think they mean to say like we're intentionally kind of ignoring the like cultural implications of modern times, right? I think it was more they were telling the story more about the family and the family dynamics. And I think if they had honed in on that more, made it more clear in their marketing, that we would be having a different discussion, because they were trying to capitalize off the Selena name. But I mean, you read YouTube comments of other people talking about this show, you look at interviews and everyone's disappointed. It's the AB and Abraham show or the Suzette show. And I think if they had been more clear about their purpose, then it would be a different discussion. And they wouldn't have needed to focus on Selena as much, because honestly, focusing on Selena was more boring than AB's songwriting or Abraham's struggle, like trying to be successful economically as a family, like feeling like a failure, all things that we can relate to. So I think that's where the shortcoming was, and that's how they could have been more culturally relevant, but they just didn't. They really missed the mark, I think, on that one.
Yeah, I agree. It kind of reminded me when I first saw about, it seemed like Suzette was probably most heavily involved with the production of the show. And it kind of reminded me of, weirdly enough, like the movie The Theory of Everything, and how that was based on a book that was written by Stephen Hawking's wife, but they marketed the movie like it was just going to be about him. So then it was kind of confusing because it was like a telling of his wife's story, really. And I agree. I think that if they would have marketed it more as being the story of the family, which I think would have been really interesting, because the original movie in 1997 doesn't really do that. It's also about Selena. And it seemed just kind of disjointed, I guess, a little bit, the show, because clearly they were trying to focus a lot on the behind the scenes and the dynamics within the family, but also trying to make it about Selena, but then not really giving her as a character not very much to work with. Like it kind of felt like Selena wouldn't really have much dialogue, and then all of a sudden she would say some like very metaphorical statement, and all the family would be like, "Oh wow,
yeah,
she's so interesting." Whereas everybody else had more of the plot lines, but it just didn't feel very balanced, I guess.
I can agree. And I mean, if we want to go on to kind of the next, one of the things that I thought I wanted to touch upon as well was the dialogue, and kind of like the heartfelt, funky dialogue in particular. I mean, we are of Mexican descent, and I know many people who are of Mexican descent, even though my friend circle wasn't a lot of Latina people, just because I didn't want to associate with them when I was younger, and they weren't in the classes that I was taking. And I mean, I'm ashamed to say it now, but that's just how it was in my predominantly white school that we both went to in high school. So, I mean, Mexicans, like, they're not as heart to heart, you know, like we really do struggle making emotional statements, especially to our family, and showing weakness, I think, is really hard for us, and showing vulnerability. And it was just, I wish I would have seen that more. It was just so easy for them to say all these things like, I believe in you. It's okay. We're going to get through this. Da 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 da. Right. But I would have liked to see and relate to how hard it is to open up to your family and show vulnerability, especially when you want to support them. You know, I'm sure Selena felt that, like her whole family was pinning their economic success on her.
Yeah. And I think like too, I kept wanting them, I mean, it's hard to say, I guess, like part of me is like, I want them to add a certain way of speaking to their dialogue, but then also in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, this is also supposed to be somewhat biographical. Maybe that's not how their family talk to each other, but especially like the dynamic with Abraham and all of his kids, like I kept
Hold
thinking,
on, pause.
Yeah.
No. Ginger's barking.
Okay. But with the relationship with Abraham, like I kept kind of waiting to see like more pushback from the kids and the way that Abraham was basically like everything was kind of centered around him. Like all of their finances, all of their hopes and dreams, like everything was centered around him. And it kind of just felt like they just like the kids just kind of like let whatever happen in a way and were just directed by Abraham. And I just have a really hard time thinking that the kids never really pushed back more on him.
Yeah.
Or like, we want to know what's going on with the money because we're adults now. But also like I could see like if I were to think about our family, like that would be a difficult conversation to have. Like we probably wouldn't be as inclined to push back, but I just find it hard to believe that there wouldn't be any pushback really at all.
I mean, we had that little scene with the peach cans when AB was forced to go dumpster diving. And I mean, there's a couple of scenes around the dinner table where they're like, is there going to be more money? Is that less money? Depending on the record deal that they got. So there was like a little bit here and there, but it was just a very unfocused show, right? So anything that they touched upon was not delved in deep. So
yeah, or even like there was a scene where Suzette, like after they had added people to the band, and Suzette was like, we used to discuss everything, but now you don't tell us anything. I just want to know what's going on. But when she said that, I was kind of like, he didn't tell you guys things before, or at least it wasn't presented. Like you guys had conversations about bringing in new band members or things like that. So it seemed like there was some weird just communication dynamics. Like it was both that they could be loving and supportive of one another, but also they were presented as being pretty hard on one another too. And I don't know, it just felt like they were trying to play out a lot of different types of dynamics.
The dog there.
So it just felt like there was a lot of different types of conversational dynamics that were happening. Like they both were a very loving family, but also tending to be very hard on one another. And I guess it just didn't feel very like natural. Granted, they were covering like a very large swath of time in only 9 episodes. So clearly you're not going to see like the intricacies probably of all the conversations that they had. Mm-hmm. And also it's probably kind of weird in how it is somewhat biographical about her family. There's talking about themselves. So I'm sure there's obviously a level of bias there of not like if they did get into some major fight, maybe they wouldn't want that in the show.
Yeah. For sure. Do you want to talk about bring up something else, another theme that you found in the Selena show that you wanted to discuss?
Sure. So one of the things that I have found most interesting, and not just the Selena show, but Selena as a person and the movie, is really this idea of like, what is it to be Mexican American, or what is that identity? And in the series, I thought it was interesting. They kind of do this in the movie, but I feel like not quite as much in the series. They really focused in on this idea of like language equaling identity in some way. especially with Selena and her relationship to singing in Spanish and speaking Spanish. And it felt to me, I was bothered by the way that it was presented, I guess, because there was like a scene where it was clear where she was towards the end of the show, where she was with all of her family, and she was thanking her dad for like pushing her to sing in Spanish, because she was like, through singing in Spanish and learning this language, I was able to get in touch with being Mexican American. And before that, she didn't really feel connected to that heritage at all. And personally, I find this equation of language to identity to be problematic, just because one, Spanish in itself is not like necessarily related to being Mexican American. Like Spanish is the language of the colonizer to begin with, so to be Mexican doesn't even have anything to do with speaking Spanish. And being Mexican American specifically, there's so many other languages that could be spoken or not spoken, and I think that language in itself has a very multi-layered relationship. Like for you and I, we didn't grow up speaking Spanish, but we were Mexican American, and I feel like I've had my own journey with like having that relationship. I'm not really sure what your journey has been with thinking about that, if you have thought about that at all. But that was really, I think, the main thing that I was really thinking about. I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of that.
Yeah, I do. So rewinding a little bit, I agreed that the 1997 movie, I think, focused on that a little bit more, and like the dichotomy of being American versus Mexican, both. And there's a quote in that movie. It's like, the Americans want us to be more American, and the Mexicans want us to be more Mexican than like a Mexican, right? So it's like, it's tough, right? It's a weird line to straddle. And I think while saying that, identifying with your country of heritage just by learning the language in itself, if you think about it, and kind of from an ivory tower state, is quote unquote problematic, but I don't find it as problematic in kind of a real lived experience, right? I mean, like connecting with food, right, could be the same thing. A lot of foods that I'm sure I eat that you eat, and I can't think of any specific examples right now, aren't necessarily tied to Mexican heritage, you know? So it's just kind of hard that I haven't done my own research in that capacity. So I can understand latching onto something trivial, I guess, like language, and something that's not actually connecting to your culture, but still making that connection in your head, you know? And she learned that language, and she was thrust into the Tejano music culture because she learned that language. So it was kind of, in a way, a vehicle for her to get that. And I feel like if I were in her shoes, I would think the same thing. I think that if I had learned Spanish, I would be more connected to my Mexican roots too, as well. So I don't think I can fault that line of thinking, just from a real world perspective.
Yeah, to clarify, I don't think it's wrong for her to have done that or to feel that way. It was more so if the show was presenting that as fact, that everybody is like that. Just because, like, personally for me, I feel like I've had fellow Mexican Americans or Latinx people kind of shame me for not speaking Spanish, or even white people and non-Mexican people shaming me for not knowing Spanish in some way, like something's wrong.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I worked selling DirecTV for 2 weeks in Costco's, like I assume Mexican people would come up to me as a fellow Mexican. They would recognize my features as so, and they would come up to me and they would ask me questions in Spanish, and I'd be like, I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish. They just kind of shake their heads and walk away, you know?
Yeah, and even I think with language specifically, it has a historical violence around it as well, of people being told not to speak their language. And so I think it bothers me if people are associating language with identity being like the only way, I guess, which I guess the show isn't necessarily saying that's the only way, but that's the only way that they present the show. Because loss of language is also just like it's because of things like assimilation or things like that. Like I'm pretty sure that's why you and I don't speak Spanish, is because of forced assimilation that has happened over the years. And even with this all being said, like I have been trying to learn Spanish. So it's like it's still like important to me to try to learn it, even though I try to recognize in myself, like I don't have to learn it in order to validate myself, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely a weird, kind of crunchy topic, like surprisingly so for being so, like non-tangible, but it's still kind of crunchy. Crunchy being like, I mean, like numbers, like mathematical kind of, you can kind of trace it back.
I also thought, like in the movie, and it's hard to not compare the show to the movie, but that's really, I think, a lot of what people did with the show and probably why, leading to some reasons why they didn't like it. But it felt like all those conversations around what it is to be Mexican American, like I think with the show, I was wanting more than what the movie provided because there's so much time that has elapsed in there that I think that they could have just brought in more topics to discuss. But then it kind of felt like they kind of threw all of that in at the end of the season. Like in the last like couple episodes was when they like really decided to start talking about that more, I think.
What do you mean? Talking
about being Mexican American. I mean, there's throughout the whole thing, there's a consistent thing of Selena wanting to sing in English and having her only English album. But it seemed like maybe in the second to last episode was when they really tried to like hammer in this idea of her relationship to Spanish or just her relationship to being Mexican American. And I kind of just wish that it would have been like sprinkled out more versus just like one episode where we're going to really focus on that.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. I think we got a little bit of that in the beginning, but not so much kind of through the middle there. Yeah, very, very strange, but not really. It's not that strange.
Yeah.
One of the things I also wanted to talk about was the casting. Literally here, I have written in the notes here, casting, why were the choices made? And is it ethical of me to be upset that Christian Serratos was casted? Because I don't like the way she looks as Selena. Like, am I wrong for, like, that's mainly my main gripe, you know?
I think that, I guess what is it that you don't like about her being cast, like her look as Selena? Like, what specifically?
So when I look at the real Selena, and when I first looked at the real Selena when I was younger, I thought she was ugly. Like, not unconventionally ugly. You know what I mean? But like looking like me ugly. Like with the smaller eyes, the rounder face, the darker skin. Like she didn't look as conventionally attractive as J-Lo, because J-Lo definitely has larger eyes. She has kind of a bigger, like she has a different shaped mouth. It's just kind of different. And I've kind of come to appreciate the way I look and the way Selena looks in time, right? But then I feel like Christian comes along and she's gorgeous, like very, very conventionally gorgeous, and what people kind of associate with the ideal Latina look, like those large lips, and they don't really associate the rounded faces as much. It's kind of here, you know what I mean? It's sucked in. I know it's supposed to be a podcast and no visuals, right? Like, but I don't know. She's just too not me looking, you know? I wish she had been a little bit less conventionally attractive. And I don't know. I don't know. My thoughts are like the most flustered around this point and what it makes me feel.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I saw something like a post like on Instagram of people talking about this show, and someone was like, obviously, a lot of people have forgotten what the real Selena looked like. Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that people have been most upset about is how she looks in this show. And I think that largely has to do with how it feels like her story's been kind of like whitewashed in a way. She definitely doesn't, in really any of the retellings of her, she doesn't really look that much like her. Her skin tone's always much lighter. Her features aren't the way that her features were in reality. And even just in the show, I feel like both the movie and the new show, they focused more just on like white Latinx people. Granted, I think that is like what her sister and her mom, like they did have lighter skin, but I feel like even just throughout the other ancillary characters in the show, they could have had much more Latinx people who are also people of color. Like it seemed like they didn't really have very much representation as far as that goes, which I think was also part of what bothered people. Like if we're retelling the story in 2020, we should know that that's important. We should know that we need to encourage things like that. Kind of not really related to any of that, but I also just found it weird seeing Christian Serratos as Selena because I've seen her in so many other things that it felt odd. Like, because at first I realized that I'd seen her in The Walking Dead, which it's not wrong. So like it's a whole other issue to not be able to separate actors from the things that you've seen them in before. Mm-hmm. But even I was thinking about her in The Walking Dead, and her skin tone also was like much lighter in that show. Yeah. Which I just wondered like what happened during that time. Like, was she purposely lighter on The Walking Dead? Did they make her darker for Selena? Like what is her natural skin tone? I don't know. So I found that to be odd. And then also in the back of my mind, I was just thinking about her as Susie Crabgrass from Nancy Clausen.
Yeah, I didn't know that initially, and when I like looked her up after the third episode, because I haven't watched The Walking Dead, I didn't really know where she was from. So I was also couldn't unsee it once I did see that. You know, like such a childhood TV show, and it's definitely the Selena show. I think is targeted towards like our age group, you know. So I mean, they know who their target audience is. They chose her. So I don't know, kind of strange to me, but interesting choice. But that didn't answer my question. Am I a bad person for being angry that she's so beautiful and I wanted someone different? I mean, it's just an actor, right? It's just an actor just portraying someone. It doesn't really strictly matter what they look like, right?
I guess, I don't know. I guess in the case of like biographical content, you would want them to look as close as possible. And I think maybe also part of an issue that I think there was other people that like fans wanted casted in the role who did have that like Selena's actual look and maybe more like personality wise that probably would have been better suited. Like now I can't think of the actress's name, but who played Flocka in Orange is the New Black. Mm-hmm. I know people really wanted her to play it. Like as soon as they found out that it was happening, like people were flooding the internet about how they really wanted her to play Selena because she does just look more like Selena. And I think she had posted like some content kind of like singing her songs and stuff like that. So no, I don't think that you're a bad person for wanting her to one, look more like the actual person of Selena, and two, to be more like close to you and what you identify as looking like.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you for definitively telling me that I'm not a bad person.
You're welcome. Anytime.
And Christian, I know her heritage. She's Italian Mexican, I believe. So I can definitely kind of see those features in her. Yeah. So I don't want to diminish anyone who is also half Mexican that may be here with me on this call.
Yes, me. Yeah, no, I don't even think that was the main issue. She just didn't really like her. I think that was the main problem in the last version.
You know who I did like though? I really liked Suzette. I don't really know the actress or who she played in the past, but I really enjoyed her. I thought she did a great job being a Suzette. And I know that's kind of backtracking a little bit. I watched an interview with Suzette at the Selena Museum where she said that Christian was her first choice as well. And I thought that was, I don't know, a lie or I don't know, real. She is a beautiful, wonderful person, I'm sure, Christian Serratos, but you know.
This is not really related to anything. I just thought it was funny. I saw lots of people saying that the reason why they didn't like Christian Esther was because she's the wrong zodiac sign. And people were doing like Selena's birth chart as compared to J-Lo's birth chart and Christian's birth chart, trying to analyze. Christian was not a good fit.
Oh, I also wanted to bring up, I completely forgot, is her age as well. I mean, Christian Serratos is 30 and she was playing Selena since she was in high school. Even though I think in real life, Selena dropped out in junior high, not dropped out, but switched educational backgrounds, right? She was in junior high, that happened. So I thought it was not great that they casted older to kind of sex her up more. You know, I wish she had been younger.
Yeah, I agree. And it seemed kind of weird too. They just jumped from like kid Selena to teenage adult Selena like really quickly without some middle person, which I think was kind of peculiar. I don't think I noticed it as much at first just because I feel like I'm so used to people casting adults to play children in weird settings. So
yeah, I've been watching a lot of Disney Channel lately, and a lot of like kid original shows by the nature of my work, and they've gotten a lot better at casting younger. It's not perfect, but they've gotten so much better. It just was really noticeable to me. I was watching Julie and the Phantoms, and just the casting on that show is remarkable, except the boys. The boys are older. Clearly, they're like at least 5 years older than the girls. But the girls just still look really great. They look young. They look fresh. You can tell they're talented. And I mean, 17, 18-year-old girls still have their own kind of, you know, like autonomy, right? They can kind of dress and do how they want now. And so I feel like they just, I didn't mean now. They could have always done that. But they have their own autonomy. Like they could have casted someone younger in like the 18, 19 range instead of the 30 range.
Yeah, I agree, especially for Netflix series, because I feel like they have been trying to move towards that in their shows that have younger people, trying to cast younger actors, like in Stranger Things or on My Block. It seemed like they're really trying to be more accurate, but they were not doing that with this show in particular, which kind of leads me to another thought that I had about the show was I just felt like I wanted the production to be better, I guess, and I kind of wonder why it wasn't. Like, I felt like I would have liked there to be more of an intro for each of the episodes versus just like a little kind of not the best in my opinion looking little like animation of like a record player blending into a flower and then it says Selena on there. Like I think I wanted something just a little bit more exciting, maybe something that just looked a little bit more like I don't know, like they spent more time on it.
Yeah,
or
I
even
actually disagree. I think I thought the production was fine except for the wigs, and obviously everyone agrees about the wigs, right? Everyone does. Everyone and my mother agrees about the wigs.
Yeah.
But the costuming was great for me. I honestly didn't have a problem with like cinematography, lighting, like I mean the scripting. I don't. but the actual look of the show, I didn't have a problem with.
Yeah, I feel like the actual look of the show was fine. I think it was just kind of like the little things, like the intro, or occasionally like the music kind of sound effects things just felt like a little out of place. Like I think it was when like it was either when like Suzette met the guy that she liked, or when what's his name? The guitarist that Selena falls in love with. Either when him or Chris, yeah, sorry, Chris. Either it was when he came to the door or Suzette was at the door, and there was like they were seeing like the love of their life for a moment, and there was like some magical sparkly sound or something. Like kind of it felt like out of nowhere because they hadn't done that anywhere else in the series up until like the 5th episode or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it just felt like there's some random really cheesy moments like that, I guess. And I think I would have liked them to either do more of that or less of it, because it kind of just felt a little random with things like that. And that kind of led me to think, okay, well, in higher quality shows, they tend not to do that. So why are they doing that here? And why is it that they're not maybe devoting as much attention to things like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Moving on, I think.
So do we feel like the show was exploiting the death and tragedy of Selena? Or do we feel like it was done tastefully? Or do we feel like she has been exploited in death in general?
I think in general, I think exploitation is probably unavoidable. But I don't think the show is particularly exploitative. Maybe it was in naming the show Selena, and like I mentioned earlier, marketing it as Selena and like kind of the rags to riches stories, like her being brought up and more from that angle. But like I said, it's more about the family at this point, and that every single script got approved by the family and they were on board with the project. So I don't think that if this show has anything going for it, I think it's that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really think that the show was exploiting her death necessarily. I mean, it didn't even get that far. Really, the show just kind of hinted at what was going to happen. I think I more so kind of felt like the timing of the show was kind of like riding the coattails of other things that have been exploiting her in depth. Like, for instance, I think that there's been quite a few different like brands that have made Selena merchandise that was not associated with the family in any way, and different things like that that I think were aiding in the rise of popularity of Selena in an exploitative way. Like at Forever 21, like I feel like they all of a sudden had a ton of Selena merchandise, and I can't imagine that was done in any kind of like conversation with the family or her estate or anything like that. I kind of felt the same as how they have t-shirts of other like sad celebrity figures. Not that Selena's sad, but like her death was a tragedy. Like it'd be akin to having also next to a shirt with Princess Diana on it, or other people who have died, especially during that time period of the 80s and 90s. It seemed like there's a lot of celebrities that died in the 80s and 90s that really like their deaths kind of like blew up, and people have like kind of like a morbid relationship to those. So anyways, I feel like the show was kind of like backing off of her rise in popularity that I think to that, but I don't think the show in itself was exploiting her death. But it would be interesting to see if there is a second season or however long this show might go on for, how they would handle talking about that. And I'm sure it would be interesting and different too, since it would be from maybe more so from the perspective of her family, how they really handle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a touchy line, because like at one end of the spectrum, like I want to buy merchandise that is ethical, but on the other hand, I want to buy merchandise that's easy and cheap to buy so that I could represent something that I like.
Yeah.
So,
which is a valid point. I think I don't know. I guess it like some of that comes down to like family and what it is that they want to approve, which is kind of interesting from the show. They're very much like with other people that they bring in, they're like, you're representing us. So I would assume that they're probably like, we only want good things officially representing us and family and me. Like for instance, the MAC makeup collection, I know that Suzette was pretty involved with the deciding of colors and products and things like that. And I think part of the Forever 21 thing that I know, like I've seen them have stuff, is I know that they also have ripped out Latinx brands that don't have anything to do with Selena. They have other like indie brands that were Latinx owned that they were like ripping off of at the same time. All of those things combined together were bothersome to me, but I think they've also just coincided with this like upward trajectory of talking about the Latinx community in media.
Yeah, I mean, there's no clear answers at all, ever. So life is complicated. I recently watched The Good Place, and that was like the whole message. So I'm really on that train right now, you know. Well, I got one last topic that I have that I thought was relevant, and we kind of touched on it before, is the American dream. I hate saying that. You know that? Can we call it something else? The AD. No.
The capitalist conundrum.
The capitalist conundrum. The American lie. I'm sure that's someone's book title somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know, and we all know how you were kind of brought up to be raised in school. I feel like very little people were told right off the bat that the American dream is just really not feasible. And in the show, it's portrayed as it is feasible. And I know there are exceptions and circumstances where you can achieve the concept of the America's wet fake dream, but I don't know. It always bugs me. I feel like they should have showed more struggle, not made it a sitcom-y, and it's just a really hard kind of pill to swallow sometimes, because I mean, I grew up, I feel like, in kind of a similar environment where it really does feel like a failure to not have money. I could be quoted saying PBS is for poor kids, saying that I didn't support like government funded entertainment, to say that it's for poor kids. Like I wanted to be rich. I didn't understand that I was poor, and I didn't like the way it was presented. That's kind of the end of it.
Yeah, and I think it definitely like took on that kind of dangerous idea of, well, if you just work hard enough and you just put in more hours than anybody else and you just never stop, then you'll get to where you want to be, which clearly is not true for the majority of people. But I mean, it's kind of complicated because I feel like, Abraham probably really did believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that's become clear out of all of the representations of him. And there were a lot of other people who did feel that way, and taking into consideration like how the show really starts in the 80s and the 90s, like people probably were more so on board with that as an idea than they are now.
Mm-hmm.
And if her dad was part of the producing team, maybe he still does believe that, and maybe that's why they decided to continue on with that as the main theme. But it is disappointing, especially I think for the Latinx community, that would be continue to be like pushed upon us, basically. Mm-hmm. That as long as you do X, then you will be rewarded with Y.
Yeah. And I do feel like it's unfair of me to critique that a little bit, just because I do relish in songs like I Like It by Cardi B, or like other songs that really promote the wealth of underprivileged people, to say like, I made it, look at everything that I have. And I really enjoy that media, but I don't know why I have such a problem with its portrayal in this series.
Yeah, I think that maybe part of that is in the series, it was so limited on being able to express the joy of your successes, maybe. Because like with something like the song I Like It, like I feel like that's like I worked really hard. So now, even though it's still within the capitalist frame of mind, but at least now I get to celebrate by having like nice cars and fancy things and stuff like that. And it seemed like in the show, whenever somebody tried to express that joy, it was almost met with shame, or like, we gotta hide from dad that I got this fancy new car that I worked really hard for. Like, well, that's still like a problematic frame of thinking of just like money and value items. That doesn't detract from it is like exciting and good if you are able to move up financially in the world as a person if you didn't get to come from that position originally. Those are my thoughts. I feel there's a lot more that could be said on that as an issue, especially in terms of music, but I think that would be something
different.
To
I mean, Selena, the show is supposedly so closely tied to music, but I mean, I didn't really feel that kind of tie with her music. I mean, the thing that I think about most is how, wow, I really didn't know that AB had to put in so much hard work, had 2 kids, and really like wrote those songs, like that's the number one thing that I think about. I don't really think about her music. I don't think about Selena. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I feel like that was also a big takeaway. And I kind of wonder what it would have been like had we been alive when Selena was really at the height of her career, and how we would view it differently. Because I'm sure that there's lots of people who didn't like the J-Lo movie who were more familiar with Selena when she was alive, and they hated that movie and how they represented people. Or maybe had we been alive then, we would have known that about AB and had more of an appreciation for his like solo stuff that I think he did later on, or things like that. Because for us, I think it's kind of interesting. Like, we knew Selena kind of ubiquitously with the J-Lo movie and things like that, because we were born in the mid-90s and we kind of missed out on that prior. So I think we probably have a different knowing of that kind of stuff too.
Perhaps. I mean, as a kid, I wasn't very forgiving of anything. I mean, my dad bought the Cumbia King CD, which I believe is like produced by AB, and like it's his dad doing music. And like my dad would play it and I just roll my eyes, right? Like, it's not Selena.
Yeah. Which is something that I would like to pose to you as a question. Like, do you feel like you do find any like similarities, I guess, in Selena's family or her family dynamic and your own family?
Yeah, I mean, my dad, I think, very much believed in the American dream, and if we worked hard enough, that we would really make something of ourselves. And like, unfortunately, we were the hope, his beacon, that we could be successful and bring our family out of where we were. My dad working at a grocery store, my mom working in collections. I mean, that didn't happen. So I think that does put a lot of kind of a complex on all of us kids, unfortunately, that I mean, Selena was able to rise up and bring her family out of this pit, and we can kind of all look up to her. And I think that's why she's so awe-inspiring, that she came from our situation and she was able to do it, like, or a similar situation.
Yeah, I feel like definitely part of the reason why I liked the movie as a kid, like a little kid, was because I could like see your dad in the dad, which made it feel very like real, I guess.
Yeah.
I can see a person like that right now. like all the time.
It's very real. It's very demanding. And I'm sure those kids, I'm sure they do now, they feel the ever looming pressure of, am I going to fail? And I think it just kind of sticks with you. And I think that's what believing in the American dreams promotes, is that just ever looming sense of you failed.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, so would you like to give any final thoughts on the Selena Netflix series?
Yeah, but I think I want to hear yours first.
Okay. So my final thoughts, I feel like it was enjoyable enough to watch. Like, I didn't hate it. I think for me, the type of person that I am, the type of content that I want to watch, I more so want something that's going to be a little bit more like hard hitting with the sub context of political content or something. Like, I want there to be more behind what is being told. And if it's not, I think I want it to be more like flowery in the storytelling. Not that it wouldn't be still true to Selena's life, but I think I just would have wanted it to be a little bit more over the top, I guess, with things. But again, I didn't hate it. It was fine. I am curious to see if there will be a second season. I have not seen anything if it has been renewed for a second season or not. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if it didn't get a second season, just based on people's reception to it. But we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, I think I have to 100% agree with you, where I wanted it to be either more dramatic or more relevant. It was just neither. It really just took a very middle of the road, Friends-like approach to telling a story, and it was unappreciated. And I think they probably learned a lesson. And I'm sure it's like a wonderful piece for the family to have, and because it does represent a lot of the family around Selena. And I would be happy as a family if something like that were given to me, you know. So I'm glad they have it. I don't think the world is worse for it existing. But it was a little disappointing. Yeah. It's just even the love story at the end, the last two episodes, I could not give anything about what was happening. I was so bored. I just wanted it to be over those last two episodes. I wasn't compelled by Selena and Chris, and I wasn't really compelled either in the film, but at least I think the Chris was more attractive in my child mind than this Chris was. And he just was like more like a bad boy. Like, I bought the bad boy more in the film than the show. So I just wanted it better. And I know that Chris himself, and he has an autobiography, I believe. And like, I know he was like in prison early on in like the band life and struggled with some drugs. So I think that would have been really interesting. But here we are, living in this reality. You know. All right, so that's genuinely everything there is to talk about the Selena series. Literally, there's nothing else, so you don't need to watch any other content. So I really appreciate you for joining us on our first podcast with Prickly Pear Primas. I'm Rian, and sad sometimes, and this is Savanah, and she is also sad sometimes. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Please make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below if you have any ideas for future upcoming podcasts.